Hey everyone, I wanted to just make a video with some debt payoff scenarios just to kind of give you some ideas on how to approach paying off debt. I figured by giving some examples, it would give you some ideas on how you could approach your own debt. So if you're really wanting to focus on paying off all your debt and becoming debt free, the first thing I would recommend doing is writing down all of your debts, the balance you owe on those debts, and then the interest rate. And there's a couple different approaches that people recommend. Some people recommend paying off your highest interest rate debts first. So that would be this one at 19%. And then some people recommend paying off the ones with the smallest balance first, which would be this first credit card here. I really don't have a preference. I think you should do what works for you and what makes sense for you. I do think that paying off small debts of less than, say, $1,000 does help give you momentum and motivation to keep going. So I really like that idea. In addition to that, I think that when you have less credit cards to deal with to begin with, that is a little less stressful, because if you paid off this credit card first, now you're only dealing with 2 credit cards and the car loan and the student loan instead of 3 credit cards and the car loan and the student loan. So I do think that paying off some of the small balances first can have a huge benefit. So I probably would pay off this $341 credit card first in this scenario. So the way I would approach it is pay off as much as possible. All your extra money is going to go towards this particular debt until it's paid off, while you're paying minimum payments on the rest of your debts. That's called the snowball method. You're focusing on one debt at a time, putting as much extra money towards that debt as you can to pay it off. And then once you pay it off, then you use the same approach with the next debt. So I would do this one first, pay that off. And then once you pay that off, then I would probably go ahead and approach this next credit card that has a 19% interest rate. That is probably the second debt I would tackle. And then I would pay off the last credit card next. I would focus on that one next. And then after that, you've got a car loan and student loans at the same interest rate. So it would really just be up to you on which one you paid off first. Now, I know when you have student loans, you can do deferments and things like that. So if it were me, I wouldn't want to get my car repoed because I couldn't pay the payment. So I would probably tackle the car loan next if it were me. And then the student loan would be the last debt I would pay off. Okay, so that would be what I would do here. And just to give you some ideas on how to manage this, you're either going to have to increase your income or reduce your expenses, or a combination of both. I personally like the idea of increasing income. I am the queen of having second jobs and side jobs and multiple jobs at the same time. I personally like that because I get bored if I'm in one job that's the same job. So I personally just like to do that. And I have done it in the past when I was paying off debt. And that is what works for me. Some people like to be super frugal and focus more on cutting expenses, which I do think everybody should do to some extent. But I never like to be in super frugal. To me, that's not really enjoyable. I want to do a little bit of enjoyable stuff and go out and buy clothes and things like that I want occasionally within reason. So I always focus more on the income side than the expense side when I was paying off debt. And I paid off $28,000 when I was in my late 20s, early 30s. That's how much debt I had at the time. And it took me, I'd say 3 or 4 years to pay that off, but that was because I was on a teacher's salary, so my main job was really low, pretty low income, and it was easier for me to just go out and find other work, increasing my income doing side jobs. And there's a lot of ideas out on the internet on how you can get, what kind of side jobs you can do to make extra money. So I kind of went off subject there, but again, this whole video, the whole concept is to give you some momentum, give you some ideas on how you can tackle your own debt. Okay, and then in scenario number 2, there are 2 credit cards at 29%. So me personally, I would pay those off first because that's a really high interest rate. So I'd probably pay off the $2,000 one first, and then the $31,880 one second. And then I would go back to this one. This would be the third thing I would pay off because it's the next highest interest rate and it's the smallest balance. So that makes that an easy decision. And then I would pay off this last credit card last. So that's how I would approach those. And then as far as the student loans, you've got one much bigger than the other as far as the balance is concerned, but the interest rate is very similar. So I think you could go either way on this one. It would just be your personal preference. If it were me, I would probably tend to go ahead and pay off. I would probably lean towards paying off the smaller balance first and then leaving that big, large debt for last. But you could, again, personal preference, you could probably go either way. And I don't think it'd make a huge difference overall. It would just be up to you and how much patience you have. I'm not overall a very patient person, so I would get really impatient paying off this $25,000 one, and it would feel like progress was taking forever. So that's why I personally would pay the smaller balance first. But if you have a lot more patience than me, you might want to pay off the higher interest rate one first. Okay? And then the last scenario, you've got this very large credit card balance at 29%. So that would be something I'd want to tackle pretty quickly. But at the same time, you've got this $220 smaller balance credit card. So if it were me, I would probably, since $220 could probably be paid off, hopefully in a month or two, I would want to go ahead and get that one out of the way. And then, even though these 2 credit cards have a smaller overall balance, I'd still really want to get rid of that 29% interest rate. So I would my second payoff would be that credit card. And then after that, you've got 2 very similar interest rates here, but this balance is much smaller. So I'd probably go to the smaller one first or next, and then leave the 5,001 last. Okay, and then once I paid off all the credit cards, I would start working on the car payments. This one's pretty easy. This one has a higher interest rate and a smaller balance than this one. So I would pay this one off next, and then the other car payment, and then mortgage would probably be last. So hopefully that gives you some ideas on your debt situation. Definitely make a list like this. I recommend reading some books by Dave Ramsey. He talks about the snowball method in his books. He actually advocates paying the smallest balance first, which, you can do that. There's nothing wrong with that approach. I just personally do things a little bit differently, but either way, good luck on paying off debt.